Are you lost too? Or just pretending you're not? The question hung in the cold night air, soft but sharp enough to cut through everything Adrian Wolfe had spent years building around himself. The kind of silence money couldn't fix and power couldn't silence. And for a moment, he didn't answer, not because he didn't hear her, but because no one had ever asked him that before. Not like that. Not without wanting something in return. The train station hummed quietly behind them, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting long reflections across the polished floor, and somewhere in the distance, a delayed announcement echoed through the speakers, but neither of them moved. Clara Bennett stood a few feet away, a worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder, her fingers wrapped around the strap like it was the only thing grounding her, her coat too thin for the late fall chill, strands of hair clinging to her cheeks as the wind slipped through the open platform. She looked like she didn't belong anywhere, and somehow, that made her the only real thing in Adrian's perfectly controlled world. He glanced down at his watch out of habit, a sleek piece of engineering that measured every second of his life, every deal, every decision, every calculated move. But time felt different here, slower, heavier, like it was waiting for him to say something honest for once. People don't usually ask strangers that, he finally said, his voice calm, measured, the way it always was in boardrooms and negotiations, but it sounded out of place here, almost rehearsed. Clara tilted her head slightly, studying him, not his tailored coat or the expensive shoes that never touched dirt, but his eyes, the part he never managed to fully hide. That's because most people are too busy pretending they know exactly where they're going, she replied, a faint, tired smile pulling at the corner of her lips, like she understood something he didn't. A train rushed past on the far track, wind whipping through the platform, rattling loose papers and tugging at Clara's sleeve, but Adrian didn't look away from her. He noticed the small details instead, the frayed edge of her bag, the faint smudge of charcoal on her fingertips, the way she shifted her weight like she'd been standing too long with nowhere to go. He had spent years surrounded by people who polished every detail to perfection, who curated their lives like presentations, and yet this stranger, standing in a place most people only pass through, felt more real than anyone he had spoken to all week. "So what about you?" he asked, almost before he could stop himself. "Are you lost?" Clara let out a quiet breath, her gaze drifting briefly toward the dark tracks stretching into the distance, endless and uncertain. "I was," she said, her voice softer now, almost swallowed by the hum of the station. "I think I still am, just not in the same way." Adrian felt something shift, subtle but undeniable, like a crack forming in glass that had never been touched before. He straightened slightly, slipping his hands into his coat pockets, returning to the version of himself that made decisions quickly, efficiently, without hesitation. "What if being lost isn't the problem?" he said, his tone sharpening just enough to sound like logic again. Clara looked back at him, curious. "Then what is?" He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary, and for the first time in a long time, his next words weren't part of any strategy, any plan, any carefully structured outcome. "Not having a way out," he said. The words lingered between them, heavier now, charged with something neither of them fully understood yet. Adrian reached into his coat, pulling out a sleek, folded document, the paper crisp, untouched, like everything else in his world, and extended it toward her without breaking eye contact. "Marry me," he said simply, as if he were offering a solution to a problem, not rewriting both of their lives in a single sentence. Clara blinked, caught off guard, her fingers tightening around her bag as she stared at him, searching his face for a hint of a joke, a crack in his composure, but there was none. Just certainty, just control, and something else beneath it, something quieter. "It's just a contract," Adrian added, his voice steady, almost reassuring, like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Around them, the station carried on, people passing by without noticing, announcements continuing, trains arriving and leaving. But in that moment, everything narrowed down to the space between them, to a single decision neither of them had been looking for, and yet somehow, both of them needed more than they were ready to admit. Clara did not take the paper right away, her eyes moving from the document to Adrian's face and back again, as if the answer might be hidden somewhere between the two. And for a second, the noise of the station faded into something distant, like the world had stepped back to watch what she would do next. "You cannot be serious," she said quietly, not mocking him, not even fully rejecting the idea, just trying to understand how a stranger could stand in front of her and offer something so absurd with that level of certainty. Adrian did not flinch. "I am," he replied, his tone steady, almost clinical, like he was explaining a business model instead of proposing a marriage. "You need stability, a place to stay, resources. I need a legal spouse. It solves both problems." Clara let out a small breath, the kind that carried exhaustion more than disbelief, and shifted her weight, her fingers brushing the edge of the document without fully accepting it. "And what exactly do you get out of this besides paperwork?" she asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. Adrian hesitated for half a second, not because he did not have an answer, but because the truth sounded colder out loud than it did in his head. "Control," he said finally. "My family expects me to marry someone they choose. My board expects predictability. This arrangement gives me both, without compromising anything that matters." Clara studied him again, this time more carefully, as if she were trying to see past the surface he had perfected, and for a moment, she noticed something most people would miss: the way his jaw tightened just slightly when he mentioned his family, the way his voice lost its edge for just a fraction of a second. "And I am just convenient," she said, not bitter, just stating what felt obvious. Adrian did not deny it. "You are independent of my world," he said. "That makes this clean." A train screeched to a stop behind them, doors sliding open as passengers stepped out into the cold air, but Clara barely noticed, her thoughts moving faster now, weighing something much heavier than the paper in front of her. She thought about the landlord who had given her until Friday, about the last few dollars in her pocket, about the sketchbook buried in her bag filled with drawings no one had ever paid for, and the quiet, persistent fear that she was running out of time to figure out what her life was supposed to be. "How long?" she asked suddenly. Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "1 year," he said. "Public appearances as required. No interference in your personal space beyond what is necessary for appearances. Financial support, housing, and anything you need to get back on your feet." Clara let out a soft, almost humorless laugh, shaking her head slightly. "You talk about this like it is a lease agreement." "In many ways, it is," Adrian replied, his expression unchanged. She looked down at the paper again, her fingers finally closing around it, feeling the weight of it, the crisp edges, the finality of something that could change everything with a single signature. "And what happens when the year is over?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Adrian met her gaze, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of something uncertain in his eyes. "We walk away," he said. Clara nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer, as if it was the only answer that made sense in his world, and yet something about it settled uneasily in her chest. Around them, the station continued to move, people reuniting, leaving, carrying pieces of their lives in small bags and hurried steps. But Clara stood still, caught between the life she was about to lose and the one being offered to her by a man who felt like a stranger and a solution all at once. She tightened her grip on the paper, then looked up at him one more time, her eyes searching his face for something real, something human beneath the structure. "You really think this is going to fix everything?" she said softly. Adrian did not answer right away, and when he did, his voice was lower, quieter, almost honest. "No," he said, "but it will stop things from falling apart." Clara held his gaze for a long moment, then slowly nodded, as if that was enough, as if stopping the fall was all she could hope for right now. And without another word, she slipped the contract into her bag, not signed yet, but no longer untouched. And in that small, silent decision, both of their lives began to shift in ways neither of them could fully see coming. The car arrived before Clara even realized she had agreed to leave, a sleek black sedan pulling up to the curb outside the station as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. And Adrian did not ask if she was ready. He simply stepped forward, opening the door with a quiet efficiency that felt practiced, expected, like every part of his life moved on schedules she could not yet see. Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second, her fingers brushing the strap of her backpack again, grounding herself in something familiar before stepping inside. The warmth of the car wrapping around her instantly, a sharp contrast to the cold she had been standing in just minutes before. The door closed with a soft, final sound, and just like that, The station, the noise, the uncertainty of where she would sleep that night, all of it slipped behind tinted glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights moved in blurred streaks outside the window as the car pulled into traffic, and Clara sat still, her hands resting in her lap, her bag held close, as if she was afraid that if she let go, this entire situation might disappear. "You will have a place to stay tonight," Adrian said finally, his voice calm, steady, already shifting into the next step as if everything had been decided the moment she took the contract. Clara nodded slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on the passing streets, familiar blocks turning into unfamiliar neighborhoods as the car moved farther away from everything she knew. "And tomorrow?" she asked quietly. Adrian glanced at her, then back ahead. "Tomorrow, we finalize the agreement," he said. "My legal team will go through the terms with you in detail. Nothing will be hidden." Clara let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That is reassuring," she said, her tone light, but her mind racing. Legal teams, agreements, terms, it all sounded so far removed from the life she had been living just hours ago, where her biggest concern had been finding enough money for the week. The car slowed as it turned onto a quieter street, lined with tall buildings that rose like glass towers against the night sky, and Clara felt something tighten in her chest as they pulled up in front of one of them, the entrance illuminated, the doorman already stepping forward as if he had been expecting them. Adrian stepped out first, offering his hand, not out of necessity, but out of habit, and Clara looked at it for a brief second before taking it, her fingers colder than his, her grip lighter, uncertain. Inside, the lobby was silent in a way that felt almost unreal, polished marble floors reflecting soft lighting, the air carrying a faint scent of something clean and expensive, and Clara slowed her steps slightly, taking it in, not with awe, but with a quiet awareness that she did not belong here, not yet. Adrian did not slow down. He moved with the ease of someone who owned not just the space, but the air within it, guiding her toward the elevator without hesitation. The ride up was smooth, silent, the numbers climbing steadily as Clara watched them, each floor marking a distance from the version of her life she had just left behind. When the doors opened, the space beyond was nothing like she expected. It was not just large, it was controlled, every detail intentional, from the clean lines of the furniture to the floor to ceiling windows revealing the city stretched out below like a living map of light. Clara stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving across the room, taking in the space that felt less like a home and more like a carefully designed environment. "You can take the guest room," Adrian said, setting his keys down on a glass table, his movements precise, almost automatic. "Everything you need will be arranged in the morning." Clara nodded again, though her attention was drawn to a small detail she almost missed, a faint stack of untouched papers on the table, perfectly aligned, and beside them, a single pen, placed exactly parallel, as if even the smallest objects here followed rules she did not understand. She set her bag down gently, then reached inside, pulling out the folded contract, her fingers brushing the edges once more. The room was quiet now, the city humming far below, and for the first time since the station, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had stepped into. This was no longer just an offer, no longer just a conversation between two strangers in a passing moment. This was real, and somewhere between the silence of the room and the distant glow of the city, Clara realized that signing that paper would not just change where she lived, it would change who she was allowed to become. And as she looked up at Adrian, who stood across from her, composed, certain, already moving forward, she wondered if he understood that too, or if this was just another decision in a life where nothing ever truly surprised him. The next morning did not arrive gently. It arrived with structure, with quiet footsteps outside the door, with sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling glass that made the city look distant and untouchable. And Clara woke not because she was rested, but because everything around her felt unfamiliar in a way that would not let her sleep any longer. For a moment, she stayed still, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember where she was. And then it came back all at once. The station, the contract, Adrian's voice, and the realization that she had not walked away. She sat up slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the bed, the sheets too smooth, too perfect, nothing like the worn fabric she was used to, and when she stood, her bare feet met a floor that did not creak, did not shift, as if even the building itself refused to show weakness. There was a soft knock at the door, precise and measured, and before she could respond, it opened just slightly, enough for a woman in a tailored suit to step in with quiet confidence. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," the woman said, her tone professional but not unkind. "My name is Evelyn. Mr. Wolf asked me to assist you today." Clara blinked, still adjusting, still trying to catch up with a life that was already moving faster than she was. "Assist me with what?" she asked. Evelyn offered a small, composed smile. "Everything," she replied. Within the next hour, Clara found herself sitting in a chair she had never imagined sitting in, surrounded by racks of clothing that did not feel real, fabrics she had only ever seen through store windows, colors chosen with precision, measurements taken quickly, efficiently, as if her transformation had already been scheduled before she even agreed to it. She watched in silence at first, her hands resting in her lap, as people moved around her, adjusting, suggesting, refining, and for a brief moment, she felt like she had stepped into someone else's life entirely, like she was playing a role she had not rehearsed for. "You will need options for public appearances," Evelyn explained calmly, holding up a tailored coat against Clara's shoulders. "Events, meetings, formal dinners. Mr. Wolf's schedule is extensive." Clara nodded slowly, though her mind was elsewhere, still trying to process how quickly everything had shifted. "And what happens if I do not fit into any of this?" she asked quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Evelyn paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to acknowledge the question, before smoothing the fabric with practiced ease. "Then we make it fit," she said simply. By the time Clara was brought into the office, the world outside had already moved into late morning, sunlight sharper now, reflecting off glass buildings, and Adrian stood by the window, his posture unchanged, his focus already locked onto the day ahead. He turned when she entered, his gaze moving over her briefly, not with judgment, but with assessment, as if confirming that everything was proceeding as expected. "You are on time," he said, a subtle nod following, almost approval. Clara resisted the urge to look down at herself, to check if she had somehow become the version of herself this world required, and instead met his gaze directly. "Your assistant made sure of that," she replied. Adrian gestured toward the table, where two individuals sat waiting, files neatly arranged in front of them, their expressions neutral, professional. "My legal team," he said. "We will go through the agreement now." Clara walked forward, each step steady, though her heart beat just a little faster, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. She took her seat, the chair firm beneath her, and as the documents were placed in front of her, thicker now, more detailed, more real, she realized that this was the moment everything shifted from possibility to decision. The lawyer began to speak, outlining terms, conditions, boundaries, every word precise, every clause designed to eliminate uncertainty, but Clara's attention drifted briefly to the side, where Adrian stood, watching, not pushing, not interrupting, just waiting. Waiting for her choice. Her fingers moved slowly to the pen placed beside the contract, the same deliberate placement she had noticed the night before, and as she held it, she felt the quiet weight of everything she had been, everything she was about to become, and without looking away from the page, she asked one final question, her voice calm but clear. "If I sign this, does anything about this become real?" The room went still for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that carried more meaning than any answer, and when Adrian finally spoke, his voice was steady, but softer than before. "Only what you choose to make real," he said. Clara let that settle, just for a moment, then lowered the pen to the paper, and with one smooth, irreversible motion, she signed her name, and in that quiet, controlled room high above the city, a contract was sealed, a life was rewritten, and a story neither of them fully understood had officially begun. The first public appearance came sooner than Clara expected, not days later, not after she had time to adjust, but that same evening, as if Adrian's world did not pause for transitions, only for execution. And as the car pulled up to the entrance of a grand hotel lined with warm golden lights and quiet anticipation, Clara felt the weight of everything settle into place in a way it had not before. "This is a charity gala," Adrian said as the car slowed, his voice calm, almost detached, like he was briefing her before a meeting. You will stay close to me. Answer only what you are comfortable with, and if anything feels overwhelming, you step away. No explanations needed. Clara nodded, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of her dress, the fabric unfamiliar but fitted perfectly, a soft, deep blue that seemed to belong to someone more confident than she felt. And if someone asks how we met? She asked, glancing at him briefly. Adrian looked at her, just for a second, then back ahead. We met by chance, he said. That part is true. The door opened, and sound rushed in. Soft music, quiet conversations, the subtle hum of a room filled with people who carried themselves like they had nothing to prove and everything to maintain. And as Clara stepped out beside him, the shift was immediate. Heads turned, not dramatically, not obviously, but enough for her to feel it, the subtle attention, the quiet curiosity, and she straightened slightly without thinking, matching Adrian's pace as he moved forward with effortless control. Inside, everything gleamed, polished floors, chandeliers casting soft light over carefully arranged tables, and Clara stayed close, aware of every step, every glance, every word spoken around her. Relax, Adrian murmured quietly, just low enough for only her to hear. You are doing fine. She exhaled slowly, letting that settle, even if she was not sure she believed it yet. The first conversation came quickly, a couple approaching with practiced smiles, their tone warm but their eyes observant. Adrian, the man greeted, extending a hand. We were not expecting you tonight. Adrian returned the gesture smoothly. Plans changed, he said, then without hesitation, placed a hand lightly at Clara's back, guiding her forward just enough to include her. This is Clara. The woman's gaze shifted to her, assessing, curious, and Clara felt the moment stretch just slightly longer than comfortable. It is nice to meet you, Clara said, her voice steady, polite, not overly rehearsed, just enough to hold her ground. The woman smiled, though there was a flicker of something else beneath it. And how did you and Adrian meet? She asked, her tone light but deliberate. Clara felt the question land, felt the attention sharpen around it, and for a split second, she thought about the truth, the station, the contract folded neatly away, the version of the story no one here would understand, and then she remembered Adrian's words. We met by chance. She let a small, natural smile form, not forced, not exaggerated. At a train station, she said simply. We were both trying to figure out where we were going. There was a brief pause, the kind that could tip in either direction, curiosity or dismissal, and then the man let out a small laugh, nodding. Funny how those moments change everything, he said. Adrian did not react outwardly, but Clara felt the subtle shift beside her, like something in him had registered the way she answered, the way she had chosen truth without exposing everything. As the night moved on, conversations flowed, introductions came and went, and Clara found herself adjusting. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but enough to hold her place, to respond, to listen, to observe the patterns of this world she had stepped into. At one point, a server passing by nearly lost balance with a tray of glasses, and without thinking, Clara reached out, steadying it before anything could fall, her movements quick, instinctive, unnoticed by most, but not by Adrian. He watched her for a brief moment after, something thoughtful in his expression, something that did not align with the clean, predictable arrangement he had created. Later, as they stood near the edge of the room, the city lights visible through tall windows, Adrian spoke again, quieter this time. You handled that well, he said. Clara glanced at him, a faint hint of surprise in her eyes. It is just talking, she replied. I have done that before. Adrian shook his head slightly. Not like this, he said. Clara followed his gaze out toward the city, the lights stretching endlessly, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel something unexpected, not comfort, not belonging, but possibility, fragile and unfamiliar. Maybe not, she admitted softly, but I am learning. And standing there, in a room that had once felt impossible, beside a man who had offered her a life built on terms and conditions, Clara realized that something had already begun to shift, not in the contract they had signed, but in the space between them, where something unplanned, something unscripted, had quietly started to take root. The night did not end when they left the gala. It followed them back in silence. In the quiet hum of the car, in the reflection of city lights sliding across the glass, and Clara sat beside Adrian with a different kind of awareness now, not just of where she was, but of how easily she had stepped into a role that was never meant to be hers. Neither of them spoke at first, and for once, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of everything they had not said, everything that had shifted without either of them planning it. When they arrived, the penthouse greeted them the same way it always did, still, controlled, untouched, but something about it felt slightly different, as if the space itself had begun to adjust to her presence, even if Adrian had not acknowledged it yet. Clara slipped off her shoes near the entrance, a small, natural habit she did not think to question, and walked further inside, her eyes drifting briefly to the city beyond the glass before she turned back. Adrian had not moved far, his jacket still on, his posture unchanged, but his attention was on her now in a way it had not been before. Not analytical, not distant, just present. "You did more than I expected tonight," he said, his voice calm, but lacking the usual edge of evaluation. Clara tilted her head slightly, leaning against the back of a chair, her arms loosely crossed. "Is that a compliment or a performance review?" she asked, a faint smile touching her lips. Adrian exhaled quietly, the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him. "It is an observation," he replied. Clara studied him for a moment, then shook her head lightly. "You really do not know how to just say something nice, do you?" Adrian looked at her, something flickering in his expression, something unfamiliar, like he was trying to access a part of himself he had not used in a long time. "I am not used to saying things that are not necessary," he said. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing that, then pushed herself off the chair and walked toward the window, her reflection faint against the city lights. "Then let me make it simple," she said softly. "Tonight was not just about the contract." Adrian followed her movement with his eyes, his brow tightening slightly. "Explain," he said. Clara turned just enough to face him, her expression thoughtful, not confrontational, just honest. "People were watching you," she said. "Not just because of who you are, but because they are trying to figure out who you trust, who you let in, what matters to you." She paused, letting that settle. "And for the first time, you let them see something real." Adrian did not respond immediately, and in that silence, something shifted again, quieter this time, deeper. "That was part of the strategy," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara's smile softened, almost amused, but not unkind. "You can keep telling yourself that," she replied. The room fell quiet again, but this time, it was different, less distant, more grounded, like they were standing in the same space instead of parallel ones. After a moment, Clara reached into her bag, pulling out her sketchbook, the worn edges contrasting sharply with everything else in the room, and she flipped it open, her fingers moving with familiarity, comfort. Adrian watched her, curious despite himself. "What are you doing?" he asked. Clara did not look up. "Processing," she said simply. The sound of pencil against paper was soft, steady, and for a while, neither of them spoke, the rhythm of it filling the space in a way silence never could. Adrian stepped closer, just enough to see, and paused when he realized what she was drawing. Not the room, not the city, but him, standing there earlier in the night, composed, controlled, and yet somehow, in her lines, there was something else, something less guarded, something he did not recognize. "That is not accurate," he said after a moment, though his voice was quieter now. Clara glanced up at him briefly, then back at the page. "It is not supposed to be," she said. Adrian frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" Clara paused, her pencil hovering just above the paper, before she added one final line. "It is what you looked like when you were not pretending," she said. The words landed differently this time, not like a challenge, not like a question, but like a truth he had not been prepared to hear, and Adrian stood there, looking at a version of himself he did not fully understand, drawn by someone who had only known him for a day, and yet somehow saw more than anyone else had in years, and for the first time since all of this began. The structure he had built around his life did not feel unshakable, it felt incomplete. The shift did not announce itself loudly. It arrived quietly, like most things that matter, but by the next morning, Adrian's world had already begun to push back against it, and Clara felt it the moment she stepped into the office floor, the energy sharper, The conversations quieter when she passed, the kind of attention that did not welcome, but measured. They know, she murmured under her breath as she walked beside Adrian, her pace steady even as her awareness heightened. Adrian did not slow down. They suspect, he corrected, his tone controlled, but there was a tightness beneath it that had not been there before. The boardroom doors opened with a smooth, silent motion, revealing a long table lined with people who did not waste time on small talk, their eyes already fixed on Adrian, then shifting to Clara in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. "You brought her," a woman at the far end said, her voice composed, but edged with something sharper. Adrian stepped forward without hesitation. "This is my wife," he said, the word landing with deliberate clarity. Clara felt it, the weight of that single word, heavier here than it had been anywhere else, and she held her posture, meeting the room without shrinking. The woman's gaze lingered, then shifted back to Adrian. "Interesting timing," she said, given the acquisition discussions. Clara did not understand the full context, but she understood tone, implication, the way certain words were not meant to be spoken directly. Adrian remained still. "My personal life does not interfere with business decisions," he replied. A man across the table leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled. "Everything interferes," he said, "especially when it looks like strategy." Clara felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, but clarity, a realization forming faster than she could stop it. Strategy. The word echoed differently now. She glanced at Adrian, just for a second, searching his face for something, anything that would contradict what was beginning to surface in her mind, but his expression remained composed, controlled, unreadable. The meeting moved on. Numbers, projections, negotiations, words that filled the room but barely registered with her as pieces began to connect in a way she had not considered before. When it ended, the tension did not disappear. It followed them out into the hallway, quieter now, but no less present. Clara stopped walking before they reached the elevator, her voice calm but firm. What did she mean? Adrian turned slightly, his expression tightening just enough to signal caution. "It is not relevant," he said. Clara shook her head once. "It is to me," she replied. There was a pause, brief but heavy, and for the first time since this arrangement began, Adrian did not immediately have a clean answer. "The board needed reassurance," he said finally. "A stable image. A controlled narrative." Clara's gaze did not waver. "And I am part of that narrative." It was not a question. Adrian met her eyes, and for a fraction of a second, something broke through, something almost like regret, but it disappeared just as quickly. "Yes," he said. The honesty landed harder than any lie could have, and Clara felt it settle, not explosively, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that was impossible to ignore. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, letting the truth take its place where uncertainty had been. "So it was not just about control," she said softly. "It was about leverage." Adrian did not respond, and that silence said more than anything else. Clara let out a small breath, not shaky, not emotional, just steady, like she was adjusting to a reality she had not been prepared for. "I thought I was helping you hold things together," she said. "I did not realize I was part of the deal." Adrian stepped closer, his voice lower now, more urgent than before. "That is not all this is," he said. Clara looked at him, really looked this time, past the composure, past the control, searching for the version of him she had seen in the lines of her drawing, the one who had not been pretending. "Then what is it?" she asked. The question lingered between them, heavier than anything they had said before, and for the first time, Adrian did not have an immediate answer, not one that fit neatly into logic or strategy. Clara nodded once, as if that was answer enough, and stepped past him toward the elevator, the quiet sound of her footsteps marking a shift that could not be undone. And as the doors closed between them, Adrian stood still in the hallway, surrounded by the structure he had built, realizing that for the first time, it might not be enough to keep something from slipping away. Clara did not go back to the penthouse that afternoon, and that alone said more than any confrontation could have, because for the first time since she signed her name on that contract, she chose a direction that was entirely her own, not guided, not arranged, not part of anyone else's plan, and the city felt different when she walked through it alone again, louder, less polished, but real in a way that the glass towers never were. She stopped at a small art supply store tucked between two older buildings, the kind of place most people in Adrian's world would never notice, and stepped inside without hesitation, the familiar scent of paper and graphite grounding her in something she had not realized she missed so much. The man behind the counter barely looked up, and for once, that felt like relief. No recognition, no expectations, just space. Clara picked up a fresh sketchbook, running her fingers along the edge, the texture simple, honest, nothing like the perfectly aligned objects in Adrian's world, and for a moment, she just stood there, holding it, as if deciding something much bigger than what it seemed. "You going to draw or just think about it all day?" the man behind the counter said casually, not unkind, just direct. Clara let out a quiet breath, a small smile forming despite everything. "I think I forgot how," she admitted. The man shrugged. "Then start badly," he said. "That is how everyone starts." She nodded, taking that in, then walked to the counter, placing the sketchbook down, along with a simple set of pencils. Nothing expensive, nothing curated, just enough. When she stepped back outside, the air felt cooler, sharper, but clearer, and she found a bench nearby, sitting down without overthinking it, opening the sketchbook slowly, like she was opening a part of herself she had closed off too long ago. The first line was hesitant, uneven, but it was hers, and that mattered more than anything else. Hours passed without her noticing, the noise of the city fading into background rhythm as page after page began to fill, not perfectly, not beautifully, but honestly, and somewhere in that quiet process, something inside her shifted, not back to who she was before, but forward into someone she had not allowed herself to become. By the time the light began to soften, she stood, her hands smudged lightly with graphite, her thoughts clearer than they had been in days, and without fully deciding to, she walked toward a small gallery she had passed earlier, the kind that displayed local artists, the kind that gave space to people who were still finding their voice. Inside, the walls were lined with pieces that felt raw, unfinished in the best way, and Clara moved slowly through them, recognizing something in each one, not perfection, but truth. And when the woman at the front desk looked up and asked if she needed anything, Clara hesitated for just a second before answering. "Do you ever take new artists?" she asked. The woman studied her briefly, then nodded toward a clipboard. "We do," she said, "but only if you are serious." Clara glanced down at her sketchbook, then back up, her grip tightening slightly, not out of fear, but out of resolve. "I am," she said, as she wrote her name down. Simple, unaccompanied by any title or expectation. She felt something settle into place, something that had nothing to do with contracts or strategy or controlled narratives. And for the first time since all of this began, she was not reacting, she was choosing. Across the city, Adrian stood in his office, the same boardroom voices echoing faintly in his mind, the same structure surrounding him, but none of it felt as solid as it had before, because no matter how precise the plan had been, no matter how controlled every detail, there was one variable he had not accounted for. And as he looked down at the empty space beside him where Clara should have been, he realized that losing control over the situation was not what unsettled him. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just a strategy, and he did not know how to fix something that was no longer supposed to be fixed. The invitation arrived 2 days later, not through Adrian, not through his carefully structured world, but through Clara's own choice, printed on a simple card with her name at the bottom, her name alone. And when she stood outside the small gallery that evening, the soft glow of warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, she felt something steadier than she had since the night at the station, not certainty, but ownership. Inside, the space was modest, the walls lined with pieces that did not try to impress, only to speak, and among them, a small section held her work, sketches that had once lived quietly in a worn notebook now framed, visible, real. People moved slowly through the room, pausing, observing, and for the first time, Clara was not invisible, not overlooked, not part of someone else's narrative. She was simply herself, standing in the middle of something she had created. She did not expect him to come. That was the part she had made peace with, the distance, the separation, the understanding that whatever had begun between them had been built on terms that could not hold something real for long. So when the door opened and Adrian stepped inside, everything did not stop, but something shifted, subtle, immediate, undeniable. He did not look like he belonged here, not in the way he usually did in his world, not composed, not in control, but present in a way she had not seen before, his gaze moving across the room until it found her, and when it did, he did not look away. Clara felt it, the same way she had felt his presence that first night. But this time, she did not question it. She did not step back. She simply held her ground. He walked toward her slowly, not with the certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome, but with the hesitation of someone who understood that this moment was no longer his to control. "You did this," he said quietly when he reached her, his voice different now, less calculated, more real. Clara nodded, her hands resting lightly at her sides. "I chose to," she replied. Adrian glanced around briefly, taking in the sketches, the people, the space that existed entirely outside of his influence, then looked back at her. "I was wrong," he said, the words simple, but heavier than anything he had said before. Clara did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because she needed to understand what those words meant now, not in his world, but in hers. "About what?" she asked. Adrian exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something he had held onto for too long. "About thinking this was just a solution," he said. "About thinking you were part of a strategy." Clara held his gaze, searching for any sign that this was still part of something calculated, but there was none, just honesty, unpolished and unfamiliar. "You were," she said gently. "At first." Adrian nodded once, accepting it. "And now?" he asked, not demanding, not assuming, just asking. Clara glanced briefly at the final piece displayed behind her, a drawing of a man standing at the edge of a platform, uncertain, and a woman offering him a way forward, not pulling, not forcing, just offering, then looked back at him. "Now it is your choice," she said. Adrian followed her gaze, seeing the drawing, understanding it in a way he would not have before, and for a moment, everything he had built, every controlled decision, every calculated move, felt smaller than the simple truth in front of him. He reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a folded document, the same one that had started everything, and without looking away from her, he tore it in half, the sound quiet but final, then again, until it was nothing more than pieces of something that no longer held power. Clara watched, not surprised, not overwhelmed, just present. Adrian let the pieces fall into his hand, then met her eyes again. "I do not want a contract," he said. "I want something real, even if I do not know how to do it perfectly." Clara stepped closer, closing the space between them not out of obligation, but choice. And for the first time, there was no audience that mattered, no expectation, no role to play. Just two people standing in a moment they had both arrived at from completely different paths. "Then start honestly," she said softly. Adrian nodded, a small, genuine smile forming, something unguarded, something new. "Are you still lost?" he asked quietly. Clara's expression softened, her answer steady, certain in a way it had never been before. "Not anymore," she said. And as the quiet hum of the gallery continued around them, unnoticed, the story that had begun with an agreement built on control found its ending in something far simpler, something neither of them had planned, but both of them had chosen, not a perfect future, not a guaranteed outcome, but something real enough to be worth everything they had risked to find it.